Christy is back. The meeting is now in public session. Before we begin, can I remind members, witnesses and persons in the public gallery to turn off their mobile phones. The purpose of today's meeting is to undertake an examination of dangerous dog breeds and sheep worrying. The committee will hear from a canine behaviour expert and officials of the Department of Ag, Food and Marine and Department of Rural and Community Development. COVID, all those present in the committee are asked to exercise personal responsibility to protect yourself and others from risk of contacting COVID-19. Privilege. Before we begin, I want to bring to your attention witnesses giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts are protected by absolute privilege in respect to the evidence to give to a committee. This means that a witness has a full defence in any defamation action Frantic said at a committee meeting. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse this privilege and may be directed to cease giving evidence on an issue at the Chair's direction. Witnesses should follow the direction of the Chair in this regard and are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice, the fact that, as is reasonable, no adverse comments should be made as against an identifiable third person or entity. Witnesses who are to give evidence from location outside the parliamentary precincts are asked to note that they may not benefit from the same level of immunity from legal proceedings as witnesses giving evidence within the parliamentary precincts and may consider it appropriate to take legal advice in this matter. Privilege against defamation does not apply to publication by you outside the proceedings held by the committee of any matters arising from the proceedings. Members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice, the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the House or an official, either by name or such ways to make him or her identifiable. Parliamentary privilege is considered to apply to ushers of members participating online in the committee meeting when their participation is from within the parliamentary precincts. There can be no assurance in relation to participation online from outside the parliamentary precincts, and members should be mindful of this when they are contributing. Agenda: dangerous dog breeds and sheep worrying. The committee will hear from a canine behaviour expert, Ms Nanci Creedon, Director of Creedon's College of Canine Studies. Department of Agriculture of Rural and Community Development, Mr Paul Geraghty, Principal Officer, Ms Catherine Burns, Assistant Principal, and Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, Mr Owen Ryan, Senior Superintendent, Veterinary Inspector, Animal Welfare Division, and Dr Mary McCafferty, Principal Officer, Animal Health and Import Policy Division. I now call on Ms Creedon, and you're very welcome to the meeting, Ms Creedon, to make your opening statement and to be followed, and that will be followed by questions from the members.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms Creedon.
So thank you very much to the Chairman for the opportunity to speak on the topic of dangerous dogs, and also to express my gratitude for the opportunity to offer some assistance on the topic, because it is a topic, of course, that I'm extremely passionate about. In 2017, my research on dog bites in Ireland was published in the Irish Veterinary Journal. This research compared the characteristics of dog bites from legislated and non-legislated dog breeds to determine what differences there are in the characteristics of the bites between the two groups. So the research found that there was no significant difference between the bite of a dog on the restricted breed list and a bite from a dog on the non-restricted breed list in relation to the age of the victim, the location on the body that the bite was, the relationship the victim had with the dog, whether or not the dog had a history of aggression. There was no difference in the severity of the bite, no difference in the medical treatment required for the bite. However, there was a statistical difference in whether or not the dog was reported to the dog wardens and to the guards after the bite had happened, finding that the dogs that were on the restricted breed list are more likely to be reported to the authorities. When we look at dog breed and breed-specific traits, we're yet to define a breed-specific trait that is not a species-specific trait of all dogs. When we look at different breeds, we can say that, you know, certain breeds are better at herding, or certain breeds may be better at following a scent. However, there are many individuals of that breed that are pretty poor at doing whatever their specific job is. There's a hell of a lot of collies up and down Ireland in rescue centres because they're not good at being collies. So, and there are many other breeds, or many other individuals of breeds that may be better at herding, or maybe some pigs may be better at herding than some collies. So in my line of work, assuming that a dog will display a certain behaviour or have a certain temperament due to the breed of the dog is ignorant. I would never walk in to meet a new dog and assume because I'm meeting a beagle it will do X, Y or Z. I've worked with countless pure breed dogs that simply do not behave typically of that breed. A dog displaying aggressive behaviour is absolutely not doing so because of its breed. Instead, aggressive behaviour is a product of the environment that the dog is in, the arousal levels of the dog at the time, and the experiences that that dog has had in the past. The dog is choosing to behave aggressively is the dog is choosing to behave aggressively is in contact with that situation. So any time we're looking at a dog that has bitten or a dog that is behaving aggressively, we're looking at the circumstance. What is going on to cause that behaviour? In Ireland, we have a list of restricted breeds, and dogs of these breeds and mixed breeds must be muzzled on leash and handled by a person over 16 in public. This is the current legislation in place to minimise dog bites and dog bite fatalities. While there's no formal records of the fatality, I have learned from a friend of the family of the death of a young boy in Ballincollig, Cork, several decades ago, who died after receiving several bites from a litter of 6-month-old greyhound puppies. Teresa McDonough was killed in Galway by a dog attack in 2017. The attack occurred on the grounds of her son's property where the bull mastiff dogs were kept, again not in breach of the Control of Dogs Act. 8-year-old Glenn Murphy was killed by 2 Rottweilers in his home in Dublin in 2020. 4-month-old Mia O'Connell lost her life in 2021 due to a fatal dog.
Just interrupt you for 1 second. Senator Daly, would you take the chair? Because we have a vote hall there, and I know Ms. Creedon is under pressure to get to the airport, so I don't want to suspend the meeting. So if you take the chair, we can continue. Sorry, Ms. Creedon, for interrupting you. We have a vote hall, so the CDs have to go to the, so the senators will stay with you. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Carry on? Yeah. Perfect. No worries. Was it something I said? So 8-year-old Glenn Murphy was killed by 2 Rottweilers in his home in Dublin in 2020. 4-month-old Mia O'Connell lost her life in 2021 due to a fatal dog bite from a dachshund. And the Control of Dogs Act was not breached in any of these fatalities, nor did it save their lives. I'm a dog behaviour expert with a master's degree in animal behaviour and welfare and over a decade of experience working with dogs of all breeds. And most importantly, I'm a mother of 2 young children. I'm extremely passionate about dog bite prevention and minimising the likelihood of a fatal or life-changing dog attack happening to any member of the public. And to do so, I strongly believe that the legislation needs to change. But the question of what should be done, everyone's asking that. So the media wants to know what should be done. The people of Ireland want something done. The committee itself is calling for legislation that will minimise fatal dog attacks and serious dog attacks. Why these dog attacks are happening and how we minimise the risk of them reoccurring, we do not have a straight answer on that because we've no data. As soon as a dog kills a person, the dog is put to sleep. The person, or if it's a serious attack, the person will receive medical treatment and everything is forgotten about. And we're then carrying on saying that, why did it happen? I don't know. And we need experts to go in and gather the data instead of things being swept under the rug. That's not helping. So I believe that before any legislation changes, we need to first appoint a dog bite prevention organisation that will appoint members to investigate events of serious and fatal dog attacks, assess dogs prior to euthanasia, not saying we don't euthanise these dogs, we do. However, we gather data from them first, and then we can start to build a picture of the characteristics of these serious dog bites with the intention to then use that data to build more appropriate legislation. As it stands, very minimal investigations are carried out by the guards and dog wardens who are untrained in this very specialist subject matter, so appointing dog behaviour experts to investigate the incidents from a dog bite prevention point of view is critical. Like many, I believe that educating the masses will help to minimise dog bites. The Chicago Task Force on Companion Animal and Public Safety determined that responsible ownership is key to reducing canine aggression. The AMVA Task Force on Canine Aggression and Human-Canine Interactions proposed a 6-step approach to minimise dog bites, which is in line with what I would recommend. So they proposed to cover identifying issues. So it's well known that it's extremely difficult for dog professionals to identify accurately what breed a mixed breed dog is, what breed makeup it is. So we need to find a better way of identifying these dogs initially, identify groups, professionals and individuals to develop an advisory council, implement preventative measures and develop a reporting system, data management and analysis, develop educational programs and interactions with the media. As a dog behaviourist that sees many cases of dog bites and aggressive dog behaviours, almost always the aggressive behaviours could have been avoided if the dog owners had better understanding of dog behaviour and how to manage their dog's environment and handling to minimise the need for the dog to carry out the aggressive behaviours. The internet and social media is filled with incorrect, unscientific and quite often dangerous dog behaviour and training advice, while the dog-owning public are turning to the internet for lack of state-derived advice and education. Education should be implemented in a variety of ways. In my opinion, the most effective method of owner education would be to legislate for a mandatory for it to be mandatory to pass a theory test that must be passed prior to obtaining a dog licence. As we've learned, a dog of any breed and any size can cause a fatality, similarly to how a car of any size can cause a fatality. Drivers must be educated to a competent level before taking control of a car that could potentially cause harm if driven in the wrong way. Dog owners should have to be educated to a competent level before taking control of a dog that can cause harm if handled the wrong way. This theory test will be structured using the exact same model as the current driving theory test and will cover many topics which focus on dog safety and minimising dog bites. Owning a dog should not be cheap, and the funds raised through dog licence applications can then be channelled back into education programmes. The Dog Bite Prevention Organisation would oversee state-run educational campaigns to both young children and through websites and through the media. The Dog Bite Prevention Organisation would be appointed to investigate reports of aggressive dogs, providing the public with a go-to body to report incidences to, and in turn then gather the data to generate annual reports and give a realistic picture of what is happening in Ireland in relation to dog bites and aggressive behaviours. As the population of dogs in Ireland continues to grow, dog bites and unfortunately dog fatalities are inevitable. As a mother and a dog behaviour expert, I know how critically important it is that we do all that we can to minimise these incidences, and I strongly believe that putting dog behaviour experts at the forefront of creating and implementing legislation would be the best approach. So I'd like to thank the Chairman and the committee for their time, and I'm available to answer any questions and provide any support and any guidance that I can do in any way to kind of help oversee this and decrease dog bites.
Thank you very much, Ms. Creedon. And as you've seen, our colleagues from the Dáil have had to go for a vote. So we'll continue with my Senate colleagues. And while Senator McGreehan was on the Chair's list, I am obliged to take Senator Ryan first as a member of the committee.
Oh, thanks, Chair, and apologies, Senator Green. And thanks very much, Ms. Creedon, for your very informative opening statement. And I think the key, one of the reasons why I requested that we have a session on dog bites and dangerous dogs and the sheep worrying and those issues is because I want us to react in an evidence-based approach to this, because I think we're all in agreement. We all want these dog attacks to end if we can stop them, but there's been a lot of knee-jerk reactions in the media calling for more dogs to be added to the list, calling for certain breeds to be banned, and as he said, even when these crossbreeds can be very hard to identify. So I have a couple of questions for you. I suppose first is just that in your opening statement there where you said, you know, that the dog aggressive behaviour is absolutely not doing so because of its breed, but instead the product of the environment the dog is in. And would that include the environment the dog was, I suppose, born into? Because one of my concerns is the lack of socialisation that we're seeing, the lack of handling, the stress that they're under when you're industrially breeding dogs. So would that play into those behavioural characteristics that you see then coming out? You know, even when you look at some rescue dogs in the pounds that have been surrendered, they talk about resource guarding and things like that. So behaviours, would that affect the behaviour of a dog in your opinion? The other question then is around the Dog Bite Prevention Advisory Council, I think is what you called it, which is a really interesting idea. And as you said, data is key to this. Are there other jurisdictions that are doing that? There's a reference there to Chicago, but is this sort of model in existence? And then the last question, I suppose, yeah, it's just that idea of responsible ownership. And again, one of the things when you look at pounds and shelters when they're trying to rehome animals, you'll see comments underneath people going, it's so hard to get a dog from this pound, or you make it so difficult, you won't allow a dog to go into a house. But like in your experience, is that a case of the shelters and the rescues doing the due diligence in terms of dog ownership and ensuring that the dog goes to an appropriate family or home with secure garden? And is that something that, as you said, that should be done across the board, as opposed to just by the rescue? So just those few questions, if you can.
Okay. So in relation to puppy farms and early socialisation with dogs, you've got between 5 and 12 weeks to expose that dog to as many different animals, people, anything that's a social experience, and true socialisation has to occur between 5 and 12 weeks. After 12 weeks, that dog has left its socialisation period. It can learn and it can have lots of pleasant experiences or negative experiences, but between 5 and 12 weeks, if that dog isn't being exposed correctly to people and to other animals, it's not going to be able to almost like bond with people and kind of take them on as almost like same species, more or less.
Sorry, is that 12 weeks of age or 5 to 12 weeks in a new environment?
5 to 12 weeks of age. So that's why that's why responsible breeders are amazing. Breeding dogs isn't a dirty word. Responsible breeders that are truly socializing their dogs during that period are building solid, bomb-proof, friendly family dogs. If you're in a puppy farm and all you see in your early weeks is a strange person coming in, perhaps manhandling you, putting you into a different pen and then walking away, your mother dog is becoming anxious when that person is approaching. So the puppy is then learning that strangers are a scary experience. We see so many dogs come to us from puppy farms with significant behaviour problems. Funnily enough, and again, I'd love to have the data on it, but when dogs come for behaviour consultations with serious behaviour problems, it's very rare that they've come from a responsible breeder. I would almost say, off the top of my head, I can't think of any dog that's ever come to me with problems. Because the first question I will ask is, where did that dog come from? Where did you meet them? Did you meet the mum? What was the setup like? Did that puppy spend its early weeks in a home where it was hearing TV, where it was, central heating was coming on, the telephone was ringing, all these normal exposures that dogs are used to when they're living in a family home? If they don't have exposure to these experiences prior to 12 weeks, it's going to be intimidating. The dog is then going to be more likely to show fear-based behaviours. And quite a significant number of dog bites come when the dog is feeling fearful and defensive, and then obviously offensively attack. So when it comes to puppy farms and when it comes to dangerous dogs, it's inevitable that if the dog has a poor early existence, it's more likely to have behavioural problems. So there is going to be a link there. The challenge in this country, unfortunately, is finding responsibly bred dogs. They're unicorns. They really are unicorns. And in some ways, perhaps responsible breeders should be supported a little bit more, because it's so easy to go out and buy a cockapoo and spend 1,500 quid on a dog that has fleas and is 6.5 weeks old and hasn't the correct vaccinations. That happens all the time. And then these dogs can then have behaviour problems. So first step is raising healthy, behaviourally healthy, normal puppies. Next question.
Sorry, because I know I fired a load of questions at you. So one of them was just around the dog bite prevention body, and is it running in other jurisdictions that we can look at? Because I suppose we have a tendency in Ireland, we sometimes look to Britain because of the language comparison, and they use the similar system, the dangerous dog breed list, but they haven't reduced the number of dog attacks.
So Britain introduced the Dangerous Dogs Act to ban pit bulls and a small number of breeds, and they've seen an increase in the number of these dogs. So banning the breeds just glorifies them, and if you want a big scary dog, you'll pick the one that's banned. When it comes to bite prevention setup, so the Merseyside Dog Bite Prevention Organisation is run by a veterinary behaviourist, Carrie Westgarth, and they're having fantastic results. So they're doing all the things I suggested. They're going into the schools, they're assessing dogs, they're gathering so much data, and all of that data can then feed back into the right way, one, to educate parents. If we start to find that there's a large number of serious bites occur from dogs that are recently bought, then maybe we start educating people that for the first 6 weeks you need to be careful to do extra precautions and so on. But I can't advise on what we should definitely do, because we just don't know. We just don't have the data. So in Merseyside, they're doing that. They're gathering the data and they're kind of churning that back into their practices. And I don't think it would be that difficult to implement. I'd offer my services free of charge. I know a number of dog behaviour experts that are just itching to do something, because at the moment I feel so frustrated, and it's almost like being in a straitjacket, because I know the information that will help to minimise dog bites, but how do I get to the masses? Next question, I think, was about getting dogs adopted.
Well, I suppose it feeds into what you said about responsible breeders, in that if when you have responsible breeders, you nearly have to interview to get the dog.
Yes.
And it's the same with shelters and pounds. They'll ask for the photographs of where the dog is going to be kept. Is it going to be? There's no overnight keeping your dog outside. So all of those questions, and they won't rehome an adult dog with young children, and that's correct again, because they can't give a guarantee. But the problem is then, if you make it so difficult in terms of the rescue dogs, and we still don't close the other avenue, people are going to not get the dog from the rescue where they're doing the due diligence. They're going to go and get it from the online sale advert. And so I suppose that's just that to put it on the record as to why shelters do that sort of quizzing and how important it is that you find a dog that suits your particular family or your particular environment.
Yeah, I guess a lot of that and what needs to happen on that front is people need to understand why these restrictions are there, or why they're so adamant to ensure that their guidelines are followed when it does come to rehoming a dog, because they do then see the negative side. If they rehome a dog to a home that doesn't have a fenced-in garden, the dog disappears and the dog ends up back in the pound, or so on. And when it comes to having young children and adopting a dog, I mean, having young children and having a dog is hard work. It's an extra child in the house. So again, they will see the negative side of that, of the dogs then coming into rescue centres, because we have young children and we don't have the time for the dogs. So from the rescue centre point of view, it's just common sense. They're trying to minimise the probability of the dog being handed back and it being an unsuccessful rescue. However, for the dog-loving public out there, I guess there's a miscommunication. They will more so get frustrated that I'm not allowed to get a dog. I'm a wonderful person. I'm going to be a wonderful dog owner. Why can't I get my dog? Where they can get a dog is, again, they can pay their 1,500 quid for some sort of mixed breed designer dog. And the people selling these dogs are doing so for financial gain. 100%. There's no other reason to be breeding these mixed breed dogs for 1,500 quid. They're doing it to make money. To make money, you have to minimise your costs. Spending a lot of man hours socialising these dogs, bringing them on their first car ride, handling, grooming, the correct exposures that responsible breeders will do is time consuming and financially, obviously, is more of a cost. So if you are spending a hell of a lot of money on a poorly bred dog, you're likely to be buying a dog from a place that has very little interest in anything other than financial gain.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Senator. Just a couple of questions myself. I suppose more a statement than questions, and while it may come across as negative, I'm not being negative, as devil advocate for the purposes of conversation. I have an issue actually with restrictive breeds at all, because I think there are people out there, and you did say in your statement that the owners are as much to blame here as, uneducated owners. Like, we have, we all know that all dogs, irrespective of the breed or the size or shape, they have a pack mentality, and they are hunters by nature going back. So we have people who say, oh, my dog's not on the restrictive list and he's at home and he's a little lamb himself, and sure, if robbers come into the house, he'd help to pack the satchel and there's no harm in him. And because they're a kind of, that false sense of security about their dog, if he does get off the leash, he does get out and he gets into company. And I've seen it, I'm a farmer myself. The smallest of little, quiet little dogs, once they get into a pack, are able to do serious damage as part of that pack, let it be what humans would call peer pressure or whatever, but you see a different side to a dog. So sometimes I wonder if by giving them owners that false sense of security that that particular dog is not on any restrictive list, that they're giving that dog too much ladders, too much freedom, whatever, and can be led into that kind of be in denial almost because of the think that their little lad is a lamb, but he can be more than a lamb, as I say, in company. So I'd just like maybe to get your opinion on that. And then also in your opening statement, you referred to education programs and training of owners. How do you introduce that, and how do you enforce it? Because we have there's a large percentage of dogs out there not microchipped already. Mm-hmm. People don't bother following through. It's too much hassle. It's not worth it. He's not going to do any harm. It's never going to be an issue. He's never leaving the house. We have an electric wire around. He won't be outside our yards, or nobody even knows we have him. And I couldn't be bothered, basically. But even the ones, and a lot of the ones who are doing it and who will go to the bother of having all the boxes ticked, if you introduce an element of training, or another little bit of red tape, or a few more boxes to be ticked, how many of the people who are actually doing it now then will drop off and say, well, I'm certainly not going, I'm not going to be trained how to be a dog owner. I'm not going to bother, sure, he'll be all right. So could it be detrimental? Could it have the opposite effect, maybe in Wales, as the desired effect? I agree with that process, and I've been one who've been advocating it, that to get a dog licence, it should be exactly as you put it in your submission, similar to the theory test when you go for a driver's licence. But then how many people that are at least microchipping their dogs now would then fall off the scale and say, there's so much hassle there, we're not even going to bother, look, he'll be all right, he never gets out, and nobody knows we even have him.
So, in relation to your first question about dogs being pack animals and I guess joining in pack mentality and so on, this question is exactly why I think it should be mandatory that people have to have a basic level of understanding of dog behaviour. So, there's a scientist, Rudolf Schenkel, that studied wolves in captivity in a zoo, in a small enclosure in a zoo in Switzerland in 1947. He continued to reference back to dogs in his study. So he'd say that wolf A would compete with wolf C to get the most comfortable resting spot on the inside in the enclosure. So therefore wolf A is the dominant wolf and therefore wolf A is alpha wolf. His simple study then became almost the basis of where dog training and dog behaviour understanding came from. In 1971, David Meek, I'm not 100% of the year, don't mark me on that one. David Meek looked at his study and almost replaced his study, turned it into a book basically. Wolves, Ecology, Ethology, and something else. And basically in this book, he continued to reference again back to dogs. So what they were doing is they were saying that wolves compete for dominance. You'll have your alpha male and alpha female wolf. They're a pack animal. They're going to compete to see who's the dominant one. Then we're going to compare that back to dogs, and we're going to say that again, dogs are competing for dominance. Dogs are pack animals. You need to show your dog that you're alpha to ensure that your dog then becomes beta or subordinate and behaves itself. And it wasn't until the 90s that they actually said, hang on a second, let's actually look at this and find out, is there any truth in this when we're looking at wolves in natural habitats? And they went off and studied wolves in natural habitats and found that yes, wolves do form packs. Yes, wolves will have an alpha male and an alpha female. However, wolves do not compete and they're not competing for dominance. The alpha male and the alpha female are the breeding pairs. And the wolf pack is the breeding pairs and usually 2 litters. The wolf pack it's a beautiful concept. What they're doing is they're ensuring the survival of their pack. So it's very much, all for one. If there's a shortage of food, the cubs will eat first. The best tracker will be the one to lead the way rather than the alpha male, which could be the mother, or alpha male will be the father and the mother. So we looked at wolf packs and we said, yes, wolves do form packs, and the concept of a pack is to ensure the survival of that gene pool of that pack. Now let's see if this is true for dogs, because we actually never checked. We copied it. We copied what Rudolf Schenkel did. We turned it into a book. Everyone became pack leaders and dominant over their dogs. I myself put a list on the fridge when I got my little Jack Russell saying you must say no in a low, deep voice to show Pippa that we were dominant over her. So in the 90s, they started looking at free-living dogs. So dogs living it started off in Romania, and they looked at Mexico and different countries where there's a lot of feral dogs just left to their own devices to see, are they forming packs? Are dogs competing for dominance, and are they forming a pack unit? And the truth of the matter is dogs are selfish. Dogs are out for the survival of their own genes, and dogs will interact very similar to how humans will. They're a social group. They enjoy the company of other dogs, but they're not a fixed group. They'll integrate into different groups. Yes, dogs will compete for dominance over resource. So if there is a bone, yes, you may have a bit of growling over that bone, and maybe Pippa the Jack Russell gets the bone. And then you put Pippa and Sandy in front of the ball, and maybe Sandy wants the ball more, and Sandy will get the ball. So when we're looking at dogs and we're being misinformed that they're pack animals and they're competing for dominance, we're then being told by default to have a well-behaved dog, you must outcompete that dog, you must be dominant over that dog. And that leads to a lot of punishment-based training and intimidation-based training, which leads to nervous dogs, which leads to dogs that are more likely to behave aggressively. So from the wealth of information that's out there about dogs, on the internet, in books, all that kind of stuff, I look at stuff that are, from 10, 15 years ago, and it's wrong. It's not correct. So people, myself included, before I started studying dogs and dog behaviour, a hell of a lot of the information that I believe to be true about dogs is actually scientifically incorrect and ineffective. When I teach dog behaviour to students who want to go on to become trainers and behaviourists, almost across the board, they'll finish up the course and the common chat is, I feel so guilty. I did so many of the wrong things with my dogs. I completely misunderstood my dog. Now that I understand their body language, their behaviour, how they're learning, I know how to care for my dog correctly and I know how to understand dogs. So in relation to dogs forming packs and pack mentality, like I said, they are social animals, so they will, if one dog sees, they'll do social learning. So a dog will see another dog push open that door and get into the treats. That other dog will then follow suit. Dogs, if one dog is going off chasing a sheep, the other dog's going to say, that looks like fun, I'm going to do that too. In the same way as we have mob mentality with humans as well. We're not saying that humans are pack animals, we're not competing for dominance.
That's where I'm coming from. Like I'm a farmer,
Yeah,
and I've seen
so
this
they
happen.
will.
Like the quietest of a dog, but if the hunt is on, the chase is on, they're in the middle of it. And then once
Yeah.
they get going, they can do as much damage as the dog who started the chase or the hunt.
Exactly. So what will happen from a scientific point of view, other dogs are doing something. It's really exciting. It's getting the dog's adrenaline going, okay? So Pippa joins in and chases the other dogs, joins in whatever they're doing. When Pippa is in her parasympathetic nervous system dominant state, her kind of rest and digest, her normal state of mind, your dog's normal calm behavior, personality and so on, they're using the front part of their brain, their prefrontal cortex, all their memory, logic, intelligence. Your dog is your dog when they're calm. As soon as that adrenaline kicks in, what's happening is the dog's body is going to flip into the sympathetic nervous system dominant state, which means they're going to start using the back part of their brain, which all impulsive, reactive and emotional behaviours are deterred from. So when that dog is in that state of mind, similar to us, when we say, I was out of my mind with worry, I was so cross I couldn't think straight, what's the number for 999? When you're in panic mode, you're not thinking logically. So when panic mode doesn't necessarily mean something bad's happening, panic mode can be a group of kids meeting Justin Bieber. You know, same thing. They're crying, they're hysterical, they're not thinking straight. When we have dogs that are in hindbrain mode, dogs are dangerous. So when we have any of our pet dogs super wound up, other dogs are chasing sheep. Oh, I'm going to chase the sheep. I've never bitten anything in my life, but I'm so wound up. I'm not thinking straight. I'm reactive. I'm emotional. I'm impulsive. My threat interpretation is reduced. My motor control is inhibited. And all these things lead to every single breed of dog becoming dangerous when it's in what I call hindbrain mode, in the sympathetic nervous system dominant state.
That's my point about the dogs that are not on the restrictive list in them circumstances.
Every single dog, and
the
that's why
owner thinks
education is critical.
that won't happen or can't happen because they're not on they're not on this list. They're not.
Yeah, and you're right, because again, people are thinking that if I don't get one of those dogs, then my dog isn't dangerous. And that's just as dangerous as having a list of restricted breeds, because it's lulling people into a false sense of security.
For my own information, you own a dog is angry and the hair stand in the back of their neck. It's not because they're in the back. They're back.
So it's not
brain is-
exactly. So when your
You
body
learn
goes into
something
sympathetic mode, it's called piloerection, where the hair stands up, and it's the body just responding. So when we get goosebumps at an X Factor audition, that's our bodies again going into that sympathetic.
But they're in the
nervous
back brain
system
mode
state.
at that stage. They're in.
Yeah, so what will happen is the body's going into the going into the sympathetic nervous system dominant state, and what you'll often see, humans, dogs, Taylor Swift, shake it off. When you see dogs doing a shake off, if they have been wet and in the water and they do a shake off, normal. If something to that dog was a bit of a stressor and the dog's body started to go sympathetic nervous system, and the hair might be standing up in the back of their necks, you'll see them do a shake off, and that's them trying to calm themselves down back into that parasympathetic dominant state. So all these tiny little things are fundamentally important. When I teach someone about their own dog and I explain that concept about what's happening and how critical it is to keep your dog calm, they then know that. And then they see their dogs getting hyper, the kids are playing football, I'm going to put the dog back in the house. And that's one of the big triggers that I see for dogs becoming reactive, biting, when they're having fun with the kids in the garden. I was speaking to the hairdresser earlier, and her daughter got a very bad bite from a collie when she was whizzing around on rollerblades that were flashing up. So that's going to get that dog all excited, all wound up, and suddenly that dog that wouldn't normally bite is biting. It's an instinctual, natural behaviour for dogs to bite. Every single breed of dog will bite. Every single dog can bite. And it's something that often is suppressed when they're living as pets. When they're in front brain mode, they're thinking logically, they're being themselves. When they become hyper and out of control, they're going to do things that are more instinctual for the dog. And that's when my dog will become dangerous. That's when everybody's dog can potentially become dangerous. So small little things that are potential triggers and potential catalysts for serious bites, the more people understand these tiny little potential triggers, the more we can just stop these things from happening. That's why I think education is so important.
Well, that was my final question, was on the education.
So with the theory test concept, again, it can be done very similar to the driving. So you go off and buy your DVD or your book, or it can all be online. It'll be basic information about why punishment leads to an increase in aggression, all scientifically based, why dogs getting hyperactive increases the risk of bites and so on. And while you say, yes, the additional cost will turn people off, if it turns people off and they don't get dogs, perfectly okay with most of us, because it means they aren't invested enough to care enough to learn enough about dogs to become then responsible owners. So if it stops them from becoming dog owners, we're instantly filtering out the ones that aren't fully committed. It's more of an impulse decision. And And when you were saying about people not following legislation and not chipping their dogs and not getting their licenses and not doing that, I mean, that's out of my hands. That's a legal issue then if they're breaking the law. And ideally, if we did have a dog bite association that was able to go in and whether flag this to the guards or clamp down in their own way, it could all be logged on the dog's chip. Like you said, not every dog's chip. So partially the vets could become responsible that every dog that comes through their doors has to be scanned. If the chip's not there, that gets reported as well. And when the chip is scanned, oh, your dog is whatever it has. If it would be great to have an additional license for dogs over a certain weight that had to be temperament tested, and then again you could scan the chip and say your dog is over that weight and you haven't passed the test. I'm going to flag this with dog bite prevention or whoever it needs to be. But it's a concept, and it maybe it's utopia, but it would be fantastic if we could do something like that.
And there's a role for the vets, all right.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Senator McGree.
Thank you very much, Oscar Hirlock. Nancy, you're very, very welcome. And it's a really fascinating contribution. I've learned a little bit things that I half knew. And like Senator Daly, I grew up on a farm. I've seen those dog attacks. I've walked into a field, and it's like Glass the Mohicans. It's wild. It's something you'll never get out of your head when you see dogs attacking animals. But you mentioned in your contribution, and my question would be around that, the fatalities that you listed out, and none of those fatalities or the circumstances around those fatalities were in breach of the Act, and then moved on to our legislation needs to change. So in those circumstances, with the flawed legislation system that we have, we all very well aware of that. Is there something in those circumstances that has cropped up as a similar theme, as a link between each one, that actually something in our legislation was flawed? They're not in breach, but we know our legislation is flawed. Yeah. So if there is, again, data is a problem, so you might not be able to pull that a possible thread out. So it's tricky.
I know from speaking firsthand to a family member of one of the fatalities that the dogs already had been very massively flagged. They had been reported to the dog warden. I'm thinking of a case in the UK now as well where there's other dogs that have been flagged. No, the little boy in Wexford who was very badly mauled by a dog, that dog had been flagged to the dog wardens as well, and nothing was done about it. So the family that I spoke to, the dogs had already killed a pony and they'd killed another family dog as well. So perhaps the neighbours and people who knew of this and knew how dangerous these dogs were didn't know where to properly go to report it. I've spoken to many dog wardens, have zero training in how to assess these dogs, zero training really in any element of working with dogs professionally. Spoken to postmen who have no training in bite prevention, spoken to the guards who have zero training in bite prevention or what to do or how do we even start to investigate these cases. I don't know much about the second case. And then the third case, the little baby, we do know that the dog was used for hunting initially. And again, people knew that this dog was aggressive. The plan was the dog was always kept outside when the baby was around, and the dog managed to get in and kill the baby. So what would be very interesting would be if we had proper data. Maybe we would see a correlation. Maybe there's a common medical issue going on with the dogs. Maybe we don't know. You can speculate, but without the data, we're just sweeping things under the carpet, really.
Okay. And we all go back to education on nearly all our contributions, because education is key to so many things. And you've mentioned, that theory test. And again, if you don't have a theory test, I genuinely think you don't have a license, we need a theory test for a driver's license. You most certainly should have a license for a creature that could potentially is a killer.
Yeah.
And people don't have that education, they don't understand. And I've been bitten by a dog, and I was like, I can't believe it, my wee Benji there, he bites nobody. Well, he's hanging off my leg here. Yeah. So he certainly does. So people, we're just not hitting the nail on the head in relation to education. But are there other countries that are actually doing this theory test, that are doing this thing and following through theory test, license, enforcement? Is there a country that we can say that are actually putting in the resources to educate their populations, to protect their dogs as well? Because if you're a dog lover,
Yeah.
you want to protect your dog. You don't want anything to harm it or it to do anything wrong. So do we have a country to look to?
I don't have it off the top of my head. And my computer's gone off there now. I'm pretty sure it's in Switzerland that they're doing it, but the countries that are doing these kind of things already have very low dog bites and very low kind of significant behavior issues. They're implementing mandatory training and things like that as well for younger dogs. So it is doable. There are models out there that we could look at and replicate as well. And then even just as you were talking about the fact that you were gotten bitten yourself as well, there's a gentleman in America, he's a retired lieutenant from Jacksonville. He's such an interesting character, a droll man, and when he was a lieutenant, he went into a lot of dog bite cases and he'd investigate and he'd look at what happened, and he did so more so because he was the dog guy of all the lieutenants. However, since then he's gone on to get a master's degree in veterinary forensic investigation, which is out there, which we should be sending people to go, and I will put my hand up and I will do that course, to be able to then assess, because when we have a fatality, the guards go in, the guards don't have a clue. In the nicest way possible, they don't know how to assess what's gone on. The dog is taken away, the dog is put to sleep. We've no data then from the dog. And then the child is treated, but again, medically, there's ways to assess the wounds. Like, for example, the dog walker that was killed by a dog attack last week in the UK, there was 8 dogs involved, so they don't know for definite which dogs performed which bites. But Jim Crosby could go in, get a mould of the dog's teeth, look at the injuries and figure out who did what. So there's so many ways that we could revolutionise how we look at dog bites, what happens after a dog bite happens, and how we can minimise the risk of it happening again. And like you said, why did Benji bite? The vast majority of dog bites happen, that's the first time that the dog bit. So up until then, that dog would never bite, my dog would never bite. The dog bit out of the blue. Massively misunderstood as dog body language. And there's so many subtle little things that dogs will do to communicate their discomfort, to request space, to start to give warning signs that I'm not comfortable here, and then may potentially eventually go on to bite. Often if a dog does avoid, say a toddler is walking towards the dog does avoidance signals like a head turn, the dog might move into a corner, nobody spots it, the dog and the child are being supervised, but the parent hasn't been educated to how to understand what she's supervising, so she turns a blind eye. Then the child follows the dog into the corner, the dog then growls. What happens when the dog growls, which is the dog communicating, I'm not comfortable, somebody step in, the dog gets a slap, or the dog gets told off, or the dog gets kicked out the back. So now the dog is learning that when the baby approaches me, the humans that are meant to take care of me don't take care of me, the baby continues to approach, and when I defend myself, I get in trouble. Now, babies really upset me, I don't want to be around babies. Next time the baby comes, I'm not allowed growl because that was punished, so I won't growl. The motivation is still there, the fear or the discomfort around the child, so therefore I may do an air snap. And then the dog really gets in trouble, and if the dog isn't rehomed at that stage, gets him punished for the air snap. So next time the baby approaches, no, I'm not comfortable and I'm going to get in trouble, get that baby away from me. I'm a dog, how do I defend myself? I bite. And then my dog is bitten out of the blue. But with minimal education, literally with an hour webinar, I can teach parents how to see a bite is imminent and how to put measures in place to stick up for the dog. Sorry, good dog, I'll take you away, good boy, here's a treat, you go away. Now I know my dog's not comfortable with being cornered around the baby. It's my job to protect the dog, protect the baby, and ensure that doesn't happen. Because fundamental here is not, I'm here as a dog behaviour expert, but I'm not here for the dogs, I'm here for the babies. I'm here for my children, I'm here to minimise dog bites to the little old lady down the road. And to do that, we need to understand dogs, because we're not getting rid of dogs. They're not going to go. If we want to stop fatalities and stop all dog bites, let's just get rid of all dogs. That's not going to happen. So the next step is let's understand them. They live in our homes, do you know?
I have one last question, if that's all right. Thank you very much. It talks so much sense. It's like what we do when you know your own children. You say, right, you just need to. Did
you say when you own children?
When you have your own children,
two pet children.
You put them out and say, right, just go to the playroom for a while. Calm yourself down. You don't need to be here. Like dogs, they need their, and they have their own personalities.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
And they have their own favourite things. So
yeah.
we have to respect that, absolutely. You also mentioned, I'm not sure one of your questions or your answers or your contribution, but about supporting responsible dog
Breeders.
puppy breeding. And how best do you think, how is the best way for state to support that properly?
Yeah.
Because that's what we want.
So we've got the Dog Breeding Establishment Act, and to be fair, it is being implemented where it can do, and it's wonderful to see cases come out and I guess sentencing to happen as well, because I mean, as a nation of dog lovers, if we truly opened our eyes to see where our puppies come from, we will be absolutely. People wouldn't be able to cope if they knew what was genuinely going on with dogs. However, on the other side of that, we do have, again, responsible breeders under that dog breeding legislation as well. So should we have a database of a certain level of approved dog behaviour or dog breeders? You know, should we have a vetting process for gold star breeders? And should there be one central governmental funded website that we know a dog breeder on that is being checked regularly and is approved for X, Y, and Z? You know, because at the minute, people think, oh, well, it's a registered breeder, so it's following the law, so it's all well and good. But dog owners have no idea of where to go to get the right puppy. They really don't, and finding it is, like I said, it's like finding a unicorn. So maybe perhaps a state-run website or something like that where we can have approved breeders, maybe different tiers of breeders or something like that as well, because people will continue to want pedigree dogs. People will continue to want to buy dogs, and that's okay too. There's no shame in buying dogs. It's just ensuring you're not putting your well-earned money into the pockets of someone who is abusing animals.
Absolutely, that's what we want to prevent. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay. Deputy Flaherty.
Thanks very much. Apologies now, we had to rush out, and I appreciate you going to the airport as well. In terms of the current list of restricted breeds and dogs I detect you're probably not a fan of restricted lists anyway. Would that be fair to say?
It's just unscientific, and it's pretty much ineffective, and it's similar to saying, I was looking at stats earlier, and El Salvador has the highest rate of homicides, but I'm not going to say that somebody from El Salvador is going to kill me. Do you know what I mean? So it's a very similar concept, and we know of hundreds of thousands of dogs on the restricted breed list that die old, friendly, happy, family, well-loved dogs. But we also do know that having a restricted breed list, if you're looking for a dangerous dog or an aggressive dog or a status dog, you're not going to pick the poodle. You're going to pick something that's on that list, because the government has told us these are scary, bad dogs. So let's get a scary, bad dog, and let's raise it as a scary, bad dog.
So I suppose it'd be fair, from your point of view, there's no such thing as a bad dog, it's bad owners, really.
No, I'd really disagree with that statement from two fronts. One, yes, sometimes there is something genetically wrong with that dog. There's something off. Their serotonin production is skewed, or the dog may have a brain tumour and behaving differently. So sometimes there are dogs that carry out bad behaviours, and by bad I mean unwanted and undesired behaviours, because there's something going wrong with that dog. So there will quite often be dogs with genetic disorders or medical disorders that do lead to an increase in aggression. And then the idea of saying that there's no such thing as bad dogs, there's only bad dog owners, is again incorrect, because I see so many responsible, loving, educated dog owners who ended up with a dog that, whether it came from a bad puppy farm, or whether it's got medical issues, or whether something spooked it at 12 weeks old and it's stuck with that dog for life, they're struggling with their dog carrying out behaviours that they don't want. Not because they're bad owners, but because they found themselves in a situation where something has happened and that dog needs help, and they don't have the ability to help that dog. So there's bad people out there, we know that, and there are dogs that for whatever reason something's off with that dog, but where do we report that to? Because the dog wardens aren't educated to a level to assess these dogs.
And I know you have some recommendations here in terms of the bite prevention organisation and stuff like that, and it's very, very laudable. But I suppose what the public would tell us, there's probably not enough legislation around dog owners, rather than additional means of reporting bites and that. What do you think of that? Do you think is the legislation strong enough for actual dog owners? And you did mention dog wardens, that they don't know what to do. What do you think of the legislation that's in place there to police dog owners at the moment?
I think that it would be lovely to just see something fresh. something brand new. I don't know what that is, and I can't tell you what that would be until we have the data to figure out what is going on that is contributing to these dog bites and dog attacks from happening. And even at that, from a legislation point of view, whether it is legislating for mandatory dog licenses, that are theory tests that you have to pass before you get your dog license, that is what I would like to see. I don't know if that is just a dream, but something, because again, it's always going to be coming back down to education, and it's always going to come back down to somebody competent needs to go and assess these dogs that are being reported as being aggressive prior to the little boy in Wexford getting attacked or the little dachshund killing the baby. Do you know, we need somebody somewhere that knows what they're doing to do something. I can only do what I can do. Do you know what I mean? But I really want change to happen. I really want this to just not be another situation brushed under the rug. It would be lovely to see Ireland being forefront and pioneering in something different. It doesn't have to happen tomorrow. It doesn't have to happen next year.
Your work is very laudable, and you've mentioned the case of the fatalities, and we're probably only always one step away from the next fatality. In terms of a utopian approach, is there any country you can point us to where they
I think
have
it's
done something?
Switzerland. Again, we were just discussing that. I think it's in Switzerland that they do have the exams that have to be taken before getting a license. Now, they already had very minimal dog bites and dog attacks and so on as well. To be fair, a lot of countries do the breed-specific legislation, and then all the scientists are coming out saying, look, this study shows it doesn't work, this study shows it doesn't work. So I guess worldwide, something needs to change. And worldwide, dogs are more and more part of the family. Dogs are indoors a lot more. Dogs are interacting with the kids a lot more. Dogs are expected to be human a lot more. And with the lack of understanding of what dogs truly are and how they need to be cared for to allow natural behaviours to be expressed and to satisfy that dog in being a dog, again, education will be fundamental in that too, to allow the dogs be dogs while still becoming happy, safe family members as well.
But I was hoping to finish up on that, but I'll just pick up on one thing that you said when you said in relation to Switzerland that they had very few bites and incidents even before they brought in. Why was that?
Do you know what, to be perfectly honest, I'm not even 100% if it is Switzerland. I know the information's out there, but I didn't bring it with me and I don't have the straight answer to that. Again, if you've got a population of people who care for the dogs responsibly, that's just going to filter in generation after generation. And that's where perhaps we can, because with mandatory education and with having to pass a test to get your license, by default, I'll be teaching my kids the right way to raise a dog, and then those kids will be teaching their kids the right way to raise a dog. So it would see like generational changes impacted, because right now, so much of the information that all of us in this room think is correct about dogs, a lot of it's incorrect.
Thanks very much, Nancy.
Deputy Brown.
Yeah, go Margaret Kayalak, and I want to welcome the witness. I'd say a lot of it has probably been covered. I suppose this is coming on the back of young alleged Jandro Mizan in Wexford, the way he was mauled by a pit bull, and Kayalak himself knows we've had 2 bad sheep kills in Tipperary since Christmas. But since then there has been calls, we say, for stronger regulation around dog licensing or dog ownership and the enhanced ability of the Guardian dog wardens to investigate these cases. Now, we know in Tipperary ourselves, we have 1.5 dog wardens for the size of Tipperary, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Can you give us your thoughts on what needs to improve in dog ownership, we say, and how many dog wardens should per 1,000 population, if you have it? Like, we're the biggest inland county in Ireland, and to have what they class as 1.5 dog wardens is absolute madness, because we know the dog warden very well, and it's impossible.
It's unrealistic, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous for us to have such a large population of dogs. Unfortunately, such a large population of dog owners that don't truly understand their dogs and dog behaviour and how to safely care for their dog to ensure their dog doesn't cause harm to others. And then, unfortunately, the dog wardens don't have any formal training. There's no decent training programme or rigorous testing that they go through before they're then appointed to be the ringleader of keeping dogs safe in Limerick. You know, it's too much pressure really to put on 1.5 people. And again, like I said, if they're not getting the correct training, you're better off without a dog warden. Do you know what I mean? So when it comes to things like worrying sheep and dogs being out of control in public and all that kind of stuff, the go-to answer is, well, that should be reported, and then someone investigates and someone clamps down and somebody gets a fine and that money is put back into training the dog wardens again. But that's not happening. It's obviously expensive. Training is expensive. Dog wardens are expensive. But the only way for it to be effective is to increase the fines. More people are getting fined, that money's channeled back in again, and educating the owners is all well and good when it comes to putting information out there. But if you just put information out there, it's only the responsible owners that are going to go and watch that information or read that information anyway. It's the people with their fresh new, designer breed dog that never had a dog in their life that goes up the mountain and says, oh, Fluffy can go off, and sure, he's just playing with the sheep. And that happens. Often people are saying, oh, my dog was just playing, it's fine, and obviously not understanding what that does to the sheep. And I was reading a study recently that showed that sheep will recognise the difference between a dog on a short lead and a dog on a long lead or off lead, and obviously just the concept of a dog being there off lead is enough to worry the sheep as well, never mind how bad it can go. So for me, I guess it's all well and good to say more dog wardens and more education for dog wardens, or again, this Dog Bite Prevention Association or some sort of organisation headed by dog behaviour experts that then filter down through the channels, whether that is educating the dog wardens or whether that's having different representations and representatives of that organisation in the different counties and so on and so forth. Again, because if we're looking at using dog behaviour experts for this, these people have their own employment, so they can be part-time and they can be available if and when needed, but they'd be educated to the level that would be able to make a difference. Because it's dangerous, it's got massive welfare issues obviously for the sheep and financial issues as well for farmers. So it's not something that should be taken lightly, and something needs to be done. However, resources are needed, I guess, to do anything about that, and more dog wardens with a decent education behind them would help. Are we going to do that?
No, just looking at your opening statement and the research you said you've done, that there's no significant difference between a dog on the restricted list and those that aren't on it. I'd have to disagree with you. I was raised in the country and I'd prefer to get me nip in the heel from a little terrier than a pit bull, let me tell you.
Have you been bitten by both?
I've been bitten by the terrier. I've tried to stay away from the pit bull.
So when it
I
comes
know the
to
damage they
bite,
can do.
the size of the dog obviously will massively impact the potential damage it can do. The size of a car will massively impact the potential damage it can do. Dogs learn what's called bite inhibition, often from a very young age, which again goes back to your puppy farms, that if your puppy in a puppy farm isn't being handled correctly during those early socialisation weeks, they're not learning proper bite inhibition at an early age. Bite inhibition is where if a dog is going to bite, it understands how much pressure. I've been bitten by a handful of dogs. I've done grooming in my past, which dogs don't like and often leads to bites. And I was once bitten by a German Shepherd. Now, this German Shepherd had bad hips, and I was sending him to the vets to get his hips checked. Stupidly to myself, the dog was wound up outside the vets and he didn't want to go in. I was called over to put what's called a thunder shirt, which is a calming wrap, to put that on the dog to help him settle down, and the vet was going to come out. And of course I go to put the thunder shirt on the dog and I hold him by the hips. And this German Shepherd called Max, turned around, took my arm and looked at me. He held my arm, looked at me, and I said, sorry, Max, and he let go. Did I have a mark? No. Was I bleeding? No. Did I have any long-lasting damage? No. But I was bitten by a dog on the restricted breed list. That dog bit me appropriately in a situation that I was in the wrong. He was communicating to me, don't touch my hips. And he gave the message clear, used bite inhibition, and I would rather have been bitten by Max than by that terrier that took a chunk of
But the difference is you knew the situation that dog was in.
No.
When the restricted breeds catch a hold of a young
He is
child.
a restricted breed. A German Shepherd is a restricted breed.
Look, is there some explanation why a dog that hasn't shown any characteristics that we say attacking can suddenly turn outside the instance that you've given that there was something wrong with that dog with tips?
Quite often a change in dog's behaviour is usually down to a medical issue. So if someone comes to me and says my dog has always been XYZ, he's 5, this has changed and there's no obvious cause, first check is to the vets to make sure there's nothing going on with the dog medically. But then when we say about dogs biting out of the blue, or a dog has never bitten before and suddenly it did go savage or badly mauled a child, we need that data. I need to be able to answer that question, and I can't because we don't have the data. We don't have that information. And we can quite easily get it by asking the right questions, by gathering that information from the witnesses, from the victim potentially, and then I can give you a good answer to that, and we could learn from that answer.
Yeah. I assume you've looked at the legislation that covers the dog breeding establishments.
Yeah.
Should there be a single authority responsible for that?
Yeah, it's time consuming. It's time consuming and it's financially, I guess, a bit of a resource that's needed to be able to go and visit all these sites and to make sure things are above board. I would just love one organisation that oversees all dog issues, whether it's the breeding, whether it's making sure the dogs are chipped, whether it's making sure that even currently, that if your dog is a restricted breed, you're following that legislation, because we all know that nobody's following that legislation. The only time I really see dogs muzzled out in walks, unfortunately, is usually like little terriers that may potentially be snappy. So the owners are being responsible and popping a muzzle on the dog. Don't see German Shepherds muzzled, don't see Rottweilers muzzled. Occasionally you see Pit Bulls muzzled, but that's not being enforced. And hopefully more legislation will come, whatever that legislation is. Yes, we need an organisation that's going to be going around to enforce it. The guards are busy. Potentially it is going to be the dog wardens, with upskilling of the dog wardens and increasing in numbers of dog wardens. But yeah, one body overseeing dog safety, dog legislation, compliance legislation, all that stuff would be lovely.
Yeah. In your view, should the likes of them restricted dogs be allowed into, we say, built up areas, housing estates and that, and held there? Because there is the potential that if they get out of serious harm to an awful lot more people than if they were out in the country. Now, I know they should be muzzled anyway, but I have seen it in my own county that some of these people are walking around, no muzzles, no nothing, and letting some of the dogs just walk along. They'll tell you how they're very trained, they'll call them. What's your views on they being inside in housing estates?
So if that dog is walking along and well trained and responding to the owner, then I don't see what the issue would be. In America,
Even without a muzzle?
Yeah. So from a dog behaviour point of view, the dog's behaviour is likely to be a direct correlation to whatever's going on in that dog's life. If a dog is to bite, we stop and we look what happened. You know, did that dog bite because it was overexcited and things were going on and it was chasing? Did that dog bite because it was being punished or something like that? When we're looking at dog bites and whether or not his dog is dangerous, every single dog can potentially be dangerous. And by having your dog as a family pet and interacting with your family and out on walks and parks and meeting people and meeting other dogs, you're socialising that dog and you're minimising the probability of that dog displaying aggressive behaviours. However, if we are talking about built up areas insofar as people getting dogs for status and people choosing breeds of dogs to look tough and to look hard, then yes, it's probable that those people are going to encourage aggressive behaviours in that dog, which is going to correlate to certain breeds showing aggressive behaviours because of how they have been trained.
Yeah. And look, finally, I know there's others waiting again. There's been an awful lot of talk about public awareness on all of this, and we've seen it, we brought it up here and before, about animal rescues taking up the slack where the department isn't. Mm-hmm. They don't have the time or the resources. What more can the department do other than giving them more money? Because the money that is given in December, that's nearly gone the following day, paying VITS bills and all that. Mm-hmm. But they're still expected to take up the slack.
And they do.
And they do.
And they do. And
fair,
they find it from
credit
somewhere.
to every one of them.
Yeah.
We have them below a pause and the chairman knows. Everybody has them in their own area. What more can the department do to help them kind of organisations to come to grips with the...
I mean, it's always going to come back to money, isn't it? It's always going to come back to increase in funding or supports with land or with resources and so on as well. And at the end of the day, I know it's going around and around and around again, but the better we educate dog owners, the less likely the dog's going to be surrendered and the less need for rescue centres. It's as fundamental as that.
Yeah, look, I'll leave it at that. Earl, I'm going to come back in later if we can.
Deputy Fitzmaurice.
First of all, thanks for coming in. I missed you earlier. Your opinion, I'd like to hear it. Every dog can be dangerous, in my opinion. And you could have the quietest dog in the world, and I saw it myself. You could have a Bichon Frise, you could have a collie that's after cattle, and if kids come into a house and they're not used to kids and they pull their tail, well, like, they can nip them. That's it. Like, you can watch all the patterns and all the things you want in the world, but like, if a dog is not used to children, or if they're, it depends on the environment they're brought up in. And a question I'd like to ask you: do you think all dogs should be? Well, dogs should be microchipped, but do you think they should be DNA'd as well?
Who's gonna fund that?
Well, yeah, but right.
But do you mean
if we have cattle as farmers, we take out public liability insurance that if our cattle break out on the road, that and a car hits them, that we cover the people that might damage their car if our animal is wrong. But a dog can run out in front of a car and do whatever they want, or they can go after sheep. Like, I'm a firm believer there needs to be, first of all, every farmer on their farm policy does generally have the dog covered, but for that, I think everyone will have to go down that road, because the risk is too big. Because if you have a town and people having dogs wandering and sheep up the road, or a youngster for that matter, that the nip, there has to be some sort of comeback on it. And second of all, if we're going young calves now, we're going basically genomically testing everything the way we'll know where they're from. Like, if we're going to try and trace the problems, if a dog goes after sheep or hurts someone, or even a youngster, you need to be able to prove whose the dog was. Would you agree with going down that road?
Yeah, and what you said actually is a great point, because perhaps mandatory pet insurance should be part of the legislation, that everyone has to have their own pet insurance policy. So if something does happen, at least there's funding there, and that there's and repercussions from that point as well. And when it comes, legally every dog should be microchipped right now. So legally it should be pretty easy to identify which dog is responsible for what. Or if a dog runs out in front of a car and causes damage and all that stuff, being able to scan that dog and find that dog's chip is how you can ID that dog. So that's there. That is the legislation. It's pretty well implemented and it's pretty well followed. Most dogs are chipped. There's obviously a small population that still aren't doing it, but I think is that kind of where you're looking at, just kind of being able to ID
I'd be going
dogs?
further, because I'd be worried with sheep. You won't see the dog in the middle of the night after the sheep, and I think we need some sort of, if there's blood on sheep, that you could get some sort of evidence.
Well, I guess that would work backwards insofar as if you suspect it was a certain dog, then they'd be able to take
Yeah,
a
but
blood
it's hard to
sample.
say, the best will in the world, there could be 100 dogs in the area that should be scratching your head.
And I don't know, obviously I don't know much about the agriculture side of things, but I don't know if there's funding available, like whether it's putting CCTV up in places or...
No, that wouldn't work, but what I'm saying is that I think that if we want to have the dogs, people are paying, they're able to pay 800 or 1,000 or 1,500 for small little cougars and things of dogs. So if you're able to pay that, I'd say other parts of it wouldn't overrob you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. We have another vote, so I think we have, everyone has answered the questions to Ms. Creedon, and I know you're going to the airport, so thank you very much. And I'll suspend. Will I let Paul continue with the next witnesses? Will we continue? Yeah.
We let them leave their open statements as a record. Keep them.
And you have the two senators here as well, so we might as well continue, because thank you very much,
Thank
Ms.
you so
Creedon.
much, thank you.
And we'll suspend now while the other witnesses are coming in.